this. So first of all, thank you everybody for coming. My name is Mark Phillip, and I'm an application engineer for Studica Incorporated. Real quick rundown, Studica is a software and hardware reseller. We primarily deal with schools, students, faculty, administrators, in K through 12 as well as higher education. We primarily operate out of the United States, and so a lot of my presentation is going to be geared towards the United States and North America. My contact information here is on the slide, markp@studica.com, and our website is www.studica.com. So basically today I'm going to be talking about language learning, and we're going to look at a lot of statistics about bilingualism as well as the changing landscape of language learning in education. And I'm also going to show you a bit of the Babbel software platform and kind of show you how it works and why it's useful. So let's go ahead and pop into this. So this is kind of my roadmap for the presentation. First thing we're going to look at is some statistics related to the increasing number of bilingual speakers in the United States and kind of what that means for education. We're also going to look at language requirements at the higher education level and why that matters for college students as well as teachers and faculty in K through 12 as well as college. And we're also going to look at globalization and how it's affecting the economy as well as the demand for bilingual speakers or multilingual speakers. And one note here that I won't dive into in depth but wanted to mention is the health and well-being aspect of language learning. There's been a plethora of research done on this topic about bilinguals versus monolingual individuals and kind of the differences in things like attention span as well as dementia and how language learning relates to these things. And it's really interesting. I would recommend, if you're interested in that field, to kind of look into that research. I just wanted to mention it here because we're mostly going to be talking about education and economic prospects, but we also don't want to forget that there is an actual benefit towards learning multiple languages, and that's been studied to death at this point. So let's go ahead and look first at this graph that I have here. It comes from the U.S. Census Bureau. This was based on 2008 projections. I couldn't find anything more recent, but what we're looking at is the population 5 years and older in the United States who speak a language other than English at home. So we have data for 2010, 2015, and 2020, and basically what we see is a pretty steady increase of speakers who are speaking a language other than English at home, and these numbers are in the millions. So by 2020, it's projected roughly 71.8 million people in the United States will speak a language other than English at home. So kind of why this matters is that the increasing number of bilingual speakers is going to help drive demand for people to learn other languages. So in the United States, generally schools and academic institutions provide that training and learning. And so there's going to be an increased demand as we move on and more people do speak multiple language. There will be that increased demand to learn that language so people can better communicate with their friends, family members, peers, and even just perhaps for the interest of it. You know, you hear so many people speaking a language, you might just be interested in learning the language as well. So another topic is language requirements. So the Modern Language Association has basically found that approximately 50% of higher education institutions in the U.S. have some kind of language requirement in order to graduate. So what this means really for K-12 schools is that students should be getting prepared. I mean, assuming that K-12 schools are focusing on their students going to higher education institutions, they can better prepare their students by getting them started with language learning early. And early is kind of the key word here. I know, at least in my experience going through school, we didn't really start doing foreign language until high school. And by then, it's already a lot more difficult for people to start learning a second language. And generally, the younger they are, the easier it is for them to adopt the nuances of a second language, and especially the accent and pronunciation. So K-12 schools getting kids started sooner is going to help prepare them for that success in college when they meet these academic requirements. Now for professors or faculty at college, with so many courses or with your degrees requiring some kind of language program, you have to start thinking about how do we deliver that material, right? How do we ensure that our students at the college are meeting these requirements? And that's where things like language software come into play, which we'll talk about later. So here's a graph kind of showing that information that I just mentioned. This comes from the ACE, and it's looking at the percent of institutions that have some kind of language learning outcome across all the types of degrees. We see that your graduate degrees have many more graduate programs have a requirement there. But we see even at the associate's level, by 2011, 46% of colleges had a requirement just to get an associate's degree, and then that rises pretty sharply with your bachelor's, and then your master's is about the level of the bachelor's, but then your doctoral PhD level is a lot higher. So now we're going to look at globalization and job prospects, so kind of the economic angle. So what globalization is, I don't want to say it's a buzzword, but it kind of is. It refers to like the world economy, the idea that more and more countries are now doing international trading, that markets are opening up around the world and allowing more business to occur. And we've actually seen this have a huge impact on the demand for bilingual speakers, especially for United States, like Fortune 500 corporations. And what we see here in this graph is basically the number of online job listings that were looking for workers with bilingual skills between 2010 and 2015. We see just in a 5-year difference, almost double the number of job postings. Now, part of this, I do think, is probably related to the fact that between 2010 and 2015, more job sites became available on the internet, so there's probably more infrastructure to post more jobs. But I don't think that would account entirely for over a twofold increase. So there is some demand increase as markets have opened up around the world. And what we'll see here, what our graph on the left is showing, is how this demand is being spread across different types of work. So we talk about prestige, and prestige in this study was essentially a measurement of how people perceive the prestige of a specific job. So for instance, most people would probably consider like a neurosurgeon to be a high prestige job, right? Whereas a lot of people might consider something like a custodian or fast food work to be a lower prestige. And so what this is showing us is basically how has that demand increased between 2010 to 2015 for all these different prestiges. And it's actually spread pretty well. Middle prestige is lower than the rest, but we see in the high prestige realm the highest increase in demand for bilingual speakers, as well as in the lowest prestige. So in general, the upshot here is people who are bilingual or multilingual basically have an advantage in opportunities for jobs. And there was some information I had found. I didn't write the source down exactly, but there was information I found that indicated people who are bilingual on average make more money or can negotiate a higher salary. This figure here on the right is basically employers with the largest share of bilingual listings as of 2015. And you see, like I said, a lot of Fortune 500 corporations, international corporations. A lot of them are banks and insurance companies, and it makes sense because a lot of these emerging economies, are having a lot of new wealth come in, and that wealth needs to go somewhere, which is into banks, and then you have insurance companies coming in, and as well as data carriers like T-Mobile, AT&T, who are building infrastructure in these countries for 4G networks and things like that. So a lot of your demand for bilingual speakers are in these areas because they need workers who can go overseas and communicate with people and understand the cultural norms and things like that. So it's helpful for these businesses to find people who have that experience. Okay, so on to kind of the education side here. So in language learning currently, we have basically 3 dominant approaches for teaching the material: blended learning, language immersion, and distance learning. So the first thing is language immersion. So this is an approach that has become increasingly popular all around the world, especially in Europe, where they have a very big comprehensive language program. But in the United States, we've seen a bit slower of an adoption, but this graph right here kind of shows us that since 2006, we've spiked pretty hard on incorporating this into schools. This approach focuses much more on putting the student into a situation where they're constantly using the language. So this would be like you go to, for instance, I'm trying to learn Spanish. I go into my Spanish class, and once I'm in class, I'm expected to be speaking only Spanish. You have your teacher there to help you if you need it, right? So it's not like throw you in the deep end and let you drown or anything. But the idea is that by conversing with your classmates and really just having normal conversation in this language, you're going to learn it better and more efficiently and quicker than just a straight memorization, reading, writing approach. And usually these courses also focus heavily on cultural education, so learning more about the culture of the people in the countries who dominantly speak these languages. This is an increasingly popular approach, and it has been widely successful in many European countries, and it's being adopted a lot in the United States now. So blended learning is not so much a language learning technique specifically, but more of how this material is delivered. Blended learning is this idea of having you go to class a few days a week, and then the rest of the days of the week your instruction is delivered online. And this is an increasingly popular thing with a lot of schools because it, for one, saves a lot of money because you don't have to have in-house sessions every day of the week or 5 days a week. But also students in general report more positively on these types of classes where they feel they're learning the material better, they're retaining the information better, it fits with their schedules more, and they're more likely to pay attention. And so with a blended learning environment, you might say practice language immersion for the 2-3 days a week that your students go to class. But then the rest of the time in the week, you use some kind of software like Babbel to deliver content to the students or have them keep up their chops with the language, for instance. Now, distance learning is basically blended learning minus the physical presence, right? It's the 100% online learning situation. And in college, at least, this is increasingly prevalent. By 2019, just next year, it's expected that at least 50% of classes in college are expected to be delivered online. So a lot of general ed classes especially are doing this, and it's saving colleges a lot of money because they don't have to spend as much on facilities and things for all these courses, which is helping drive tuition costs down, which is a big deal with the current student debt issue that's going on in the United States. So that's one of the big reasons for this adoption, as well as what I'd mentioned in the last slide, which is that students in general are heavily favoring online courses. And at the college level, it makes a lot of sense, especially because a lot of your students might have a lot of responsibilities beyond school. They might be working full time, 2 jobs, 1 job, they might have a family. So there's a lot of other things going on in their life where distance learning really can fit with a busy schedule. In the K through 12 sector, we're seeing a much slower adoption, if any adoption at all, of distance learning. And my assumption, and I haven't read into it enough, my assumption is because there's a lot more rules that have to be followed for K through 12 public schools. And so it's not so easy for them to just, next year we're implementing a giant online program. It's not that simple for a K-12 public school, as well as funding and budget issues. But we are seeing it is increasing. There are more and more schools, and I've gone to multiple trade shows where I talk to teachers in K-12 who do have Chromebook programs and stuff like that, which is it's optimistic to see that, and students get a Chromebook to take home and do homework and things like that. So we are seeing more adoption there, but those are kind of the 3 big approaches currently to delivering educational material and teaching language learning. So with that, we'll take a look at what the actual software platform for Babbel is and kind of talk about why we think it's useful and show you a demo and everything. So the broad picture overview here is Babbel is an online language learning platform, and it comes in a mobile app as well. It focuses much more on real life conversations, not just memorizing and definitions. So they try to encourage this idea of you speaking like a normal person would instead of just reciting definitions all over the place. So kind of more like the language immersion approach. It leverages your native language to basically build upon existing grammar and vocabulary. All this really means is the content's delivered to you in the language you understand so that you can translate and your brain can pick up on what the new words are and things like that. It focuses on all the different skill sets: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. and there's 8,500 hours of content over 14 different languages. And just to kind of give you an overview of what Babbel's like, I'm going to do a quick demo here. So this website's just babbel.com, and I have an account so I can sign in. And what's interesting to note is that Babbel is basically just a website. And what's nice about this is that means you can pretty much access it on any device that can access the internet. So this includes Chromebooks, Unix systems, Linux systems, Mac, PC, your smartphone. Like, you can get to Babbel on any of these things, and the UI is pretty much universal across all those devices, and all of your progress is synced between your, it's synced with your account. So any of your devices you access on, your progress is still saved as long as you're logging into the same account. So what I can do is go up here, click courses, and I'm going to see, once it loads, pretty much all the courses that I can look at. So there's new content, so stuff that Babbel just developed, they might put on here as new content. You have your beginners courses, grammar related courses, intermediate level courses, courses that focus on listening and speaking, and courses that focus more on countries and traditions. You also have special courses which relate to things more like numbers and idioms. And then you have words and sentences courses. So a lot of different material here for the Spanish section, and I'm going to choose beginners course because I'm very much a beginner at Spanish. This green dot here signifies that this is pretty much where I left off. So I can click beginners course 1, and in here I'm going to have like 20 plus lessons that I can do. So the check mark indicates that I've done part 1. I've not done part 2, so let's go ahead and start this and kind of see what this is like. And the first thing it's going to do is, well, it's going to ask me if I want to do speech recognition or not. You can choose not to if you don't want to worry about it. But I do have a microphone. I will show that off just to kind of give you an idea. So it's going to ask me, it's going to show me a couple of different words. It's going to have somebody speak the word to me, and then I have to repeat the word back. So we'll get a good sample of my poor Spanish here.
Mucho gusto.
Mucho gusto.
Hasta pronto.
Hasta pronto.
Buenos días.
Buenos días.
Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes. Okay, so pretty much what we saw there is a couple things. We have each definition has a visual image to recognize it with. So it's a pleasure is kind of like two people meeting each other, right? See you soon is like two people shaking hands like they're leaving. Good morning, we see this kind of landscape with a sunrise. Good afternoon, evening, it shows us a clock kind of in the afternoon going into evening, right? So the idea here is to visually reinforce the definition as well as show you the written words. So it's a pleasure, and it shows me how you write it in Spanish.
Mucho gusto.
And I can also click here to hear the speaker.
Mucho gusto.
And the speakers are all native speakers, so they have proper accent and pronunciation. And so the idea is that you're trying to mimic that. And so when it was listening for my voice, it's basically analyzing what I'm saying, right? And comparing it with all their fancy technology on the back end. And they do listen for things like pronunciation. Like I've done Buenas tardes before without rolling my R enough, and it's knocked me on it and told me to redo it. So this is kind of the section that's reinforcing your speech. And so let's look at, if I continue on, they're going to show me kind of the same definitions, and this is more of a memorization / written aspect. So, I need to choose the correct translation for this word here, mucho gusto, which is, it's a pleasure, right?
Mucho gusto.
Yeah. Hasta pronto is see you soon.
Hasta pronto.
Buenos días is good morning.
Buenos días.
And buenas tardes is good afternoon.
Buenas
evening.
tardes.
So that's a bit more of the memorization
Mucho
angle
gusto.
along with the written. So it's reading the word and then associating it back with your definition. And then here's also a written where we're actually going to type it out. So it's a pleasure. I can say mucho gusto. And you kind of notice the UI here, how these words are in these little boxes.
Mucho gusto.
This is nice for mobile users. If you don't want to type, you can just press on these, right? Like hasta pronto. It doesn't make much sense for me on a PC because I just have my keyboard. But and then buenos dias, and they fill in these little special characters like the I here that we don't have on our normal
Buenos días.
So again, this is just basically highlighting each one and then kind of testing my written knowledge and memorization of it.
Buenas tardes.
And then the complete the dialogue here, this is the one I kind of like because it's more of a back and forth of like how you might actually converse with somebody, right? So you're basically filling in these underlined sections like it's a text message conversation. So I read good afternoon, I need to fill in good afternoon, right? And so I do buenas tardes. And then what's also interesting is they show you kind of like ya es mediodía.
Buenas tardes, Jorge. Ya es mediodía.
That's not something I've learned yet, but they're showing it to me kind of up front, and it's something I'll probably run into later. But also they also have the
Sí, ya es tarde.
The person saying the line to me so that I can get used to kind of the pronunciation aspect. And so these will actually test me on more than just the definitions I've been seeing so far. They're going to test me on everything I know so far. Like ella, for instance, was from lesson 1. And that's something I would remember from lesson 1, assuming I'd gone through it. Same with hola and yo. Like we haven't seen those words yet in this lesson, but they still exist because I've done them previously. So they're combining everything I've learned up to this point to kind of fill all this out.
Encantada.
And kind of finish this up
Hasta
here.
pronto.
And ciao.
Ciao.
Yeah, and so I'm not going to go through the whole thing for time reasons, but basically it kind of goes on like this. You have these different parts that really try and reinforce different aspects of the language learning process and teach you some of the specifics of how the language works and things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and close this lesson, and one more thing I'll show is kind of the reviewability of Babbel. So they have this vocabulary tab here. And this is basically a database, or a collection, I should say, of all the words you've learned up to this point. I've only done the 2 lessons, so I've only technically completed the 1 lesson, so I only have a few words in here. But we can see the image with the English translation to the Spanish translation. I can listen back to it.
Tú. Ella.
Él. Hola.
So I can kind of hear all the pronunciation. I can see how many times I've reviewed it, when did I last review it, and how do I feel about this word, right? So I can change this for my own personal reference. Maybe I don't feel good about, tú. I can put it down here at 1, and that will give me an idea of what I should focus on learning. So I can also choose to review, and I have 3 options for reviewing. I thought I had 3 options. Hold on. I think I clicked something wrong. Yeah, I'll do review these items. There we go. So I have writing, flashcards, and speaking. So if I feel weak on the pronunciation and listening, I can kind of focus more on the speech. If I feel weak on, say, writing, reading, I can do writing. Maybe I just want to like cram for a test that's coming up. I can do flashcards, which is what I'll do here. Basically, they're going to show me the picture, give me the English word, and I have to figure, it's tú. So I click this. I got it right. I is yo, got it right. So it's kind of like self-policing yourself, making sure that you remember all the material.
Ciao.
And so
Él.
this is just kind of one way you can review your content that you've learned so far. And when you finish, it tells you your score. You got all these correct. If you choose any that you got wrong, it will tell you which ones you got wrong. You can go back and review those items more. So that's kind of how Babbel works. And that's a really broad overview of how it all looks and how it all feels. And so let's kind of jump back in here. And as far as pathways to mastery, you kind of just saw that. Basically, they reinforce the speaking, reading, writing, listening, and they have numerous different courses related to beginners courses, intermediate, grammar. So there's even courses for people who might be native speakers, right? Like grammar courses. Grammar is often one of those things people have trouble with, even people who speak a language really well. And reinforcing your grammar skills, if you are a native speaker, somebody who's more experienced, that might be worth it for you. So there's courses for pretty much everybody along the spectrum of where they're at in learning that language. So Babbel's Effective, I kind of talked about some of these points. You have more of the interactive dialogue. So kind of like we saw with the text message conversation back and forth, you have stuff that's more relatable. It's like a conversation I might actually have with somebody instead of just word soup or word spaghetti of, random definitions being thrown somewhere and you have to remember them. Lessons are voiced by native speakers, and this is to me, it's a big deal because in a lot of research you'll find with linguistics, pronunciation is the hardest thing for people to master with a second language. And often it's often that even if you master a language, you'll never actually master the pronunciation if it's your second language. There's been research on that. So being able to hear a native speaker and being able to try and mimic that as well as you can goes a long way to helping you with your pronunciation. Even if you can't get it perfect, you can get your pronunciation to be a lot closer to kind of the formal dialect. Speech recognition technology helps enforce that, right? So they help you learn to speak the language better. And like I said, they do analyze things like your accent, if you're rolling your R's, and depending on the language you're learning, of course. But they do monitor that, and so it tries to reinforce those habits in you. You have the curator review sessions, like we saw with the vocabulary aspect, to help you kind of reinforce your learning. And what's also interesting is that the lessons are only about 10 to 15 minutes long each. And this is very intentional because the people who made Babbel kind of envisioned people being on their mobile device, like commuting on the train to work or something, and being able to use it real quick to get in 10, 15 minutes, right? What's also nice is that people are generally able to stay really focused within 10 to 15 minutes without wandering off too hard in their focus. And there's been a lot of research to suggest you only really need about 45 minutes to an hour of learning a day for language learning to become fluent with that language within a few months. So, it's also useful for students just busy people in general who maybe they only have short bursts of time between their job or between their responsibilities they have to do, and so they can pop in and do a lesson real quick. Another big thing is the portability. So we say available anytime, anywhere, and I call this portability because this means that you can get Babbel, like I said, on pretty much any device: your PC, Mac, Windows, Mac, Windows, Linux, your Chromebook, your smartphone. You can get it on pretty much anywhere, and it's going to be a consistent experience across all those devices. And so this is really beneficial for educators specifically because as an educator, you never really know what devices your students have, if any. There's a lot of students who might not even have a regular workstation at home. They literally use their smartphone for everything. That's fine. They can still access Babbel on their smartphone. You might have students that only have Chromebooks. That's fine. You can access Babbel on a Chromebook, which is important because Chromebooks don't have a whole lot of support software-wise, and so being able to find a program that will work for Chromebooks is really nice, especially at schools that have Chromebook programs. But the whole point is just that you don't have to worry about your student who has a Mac not being able to run this software. They can run it. It doesn't matter what device you have, more or less. So why educators choose Babbel? Well, that's one reason, what I just talked about. The other big reason is affordability. Babbel is really cheap compared to other language learning software, and I'll use this opportunity to talk about why paying a little bit more for Babbel is a better payoff than getting like the free apps for language learning. There's a couple big reasons. One of the huge ones for the free apps is ads, in-app advertisements. You have no control over these ads. You have no control over the content of the ads. You don't know what's going to pop up on your student's screen when they're using those apps. It could be something offensive. It could be something explicit. You don't really know. And as an instructor or a teacher, especially in public school, that's really leaving your fate up to random in-app ads is not necessarily a good idea. Another big reason the free apps are kind of, in my opinion, not as ideal of a solution is because they often offer these in-app purchases which are used for them to make money, but the way they implement that is by locking you out of learning after so much time. For example, a lot of them use this game approach where if you miss a question, you lose a life, right? It's like a video game or something. You have 5 hit points and you take damage, and if you go to 0, you die, right? It's kind of like that, where if you miss a question, you lose a life and you have like 5 lives. If you go to 0 lives, you either have to wait an hour to get a life back to do another lesson, or you pay them like $1, $2 to get your life refilled and start using again. I think this is largely unacceptable for an education environment where you don't want this barrier of entry for your learning. Like if your student is struggling with something, they shouldn't be punished by having to wait an hour to revisit the material if they're excited to learn the material and they want to keep trying and get better at it. And with a lot of these free apps, you can't do that. You miss those 5 questions, you're waiting an hour, or you're paying them money to get back before an hour expires. Those are kind of the really big reasons. And the last one is that a lot of the free apps don't have quality control. You don't really know who's writing the content. They do try to find people who are speakers, but they have no way of ensuring that those people are educators or that they know good ways of teaching the content. So you often end up with really mismatched and kind of all over the place lessons, because there's really no centralized quality control. And I do think that's also a big issue. So beyond that, I've talked about how your progress is synced, and a good thing is that Babbel is effective for the language learning trends we mentioned earlier. For language immersion, what you have to think about is, how do I encourage my students when they go home at the end of the day? How do I encourage them to keep using the language, right? Because when they're in class, they're constantly using the language, and that's fine. But you as the instructor, you can't like follow them home and make them speak Spanish or whatever. So having some kind of software solution is a good way of kind of making sure they do it. So you can say, hey, go home, do 1 or 2 15-minute lessons to keep your chops up, sort of thing. For blended and distance learning, we have to consider the online component. How do you deliver content? How do you deliver language learning content through the internet? And software is a great way to do that. So Babbel does kind of fill those roles. This is kind of a newer thing that we found out about not too long ago, but Babbel is currently working on a centralized license management system. So this is something I like to point out because this is something a lot of schools care about when they have a lot of software they have to distribute. And this system basically allows you to have centralized licensing for the program. You use invitations, so like maybe you have 100 licenses on your server, you can send an invitation to a student, and that student accepts the invitation and uses a license. This feature is currently in beta stages, so I don't want to say or promise a whole lot of stuff because we don't entirely know what the final thing is going to look like. But it is available upon request, so if you are interested in Babbel and this sounds interesting to you, that's something you would want to talk to our people about and see if you can get access to that beta. Again, it is a new feature. It's currently being developed and refined, so but it is something I like to talk about so people know it's at least in the works and partially available currently. So for the people who are here, we do have this offer to get a free personal copy. So if you have, you can just follow these instructions. If you email marketing@studica.com and put BAB3 as your subject line, it just includes your school name and state name, and we'll get you instructions on how you can get a free 6-month personal license. So this is an entirely free license. 6 months personal gives you access to all the features. So the idea here is that if you're interested or you want to see if this is going to work for you, go ahead and follow those instructions and we'll provide you details on that, and you can basically get the software, use it, and see how it works for you. So again, that's email marketing@studica.com. Put BAB3 as the subject line, put your school name, state name, and we'll get back to you on that. So I'll leave that open for like a minute here in case anybody needs those instructions. And kind of while I leave that open, I'll go ahead and open the floor for any questions people might have. because I'm pretty much at the end here. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat, and I'll do my best to answer them. If I can't answer them, I'll do my best to maybe get in touch with somebody or follow up with you afterwards on the question. So yeah, if you have any questions, use the chat feature. Vincent, how much does a single user license cost? Let me look at our website real quick. I'm not generally a salesperson, so I don't know prices off the top of my head, unfortunately. Oh, Christy, you can get them the price? Okay. All right, yeah, Christy can get you that, Vincent. Yeah, because I don't know if there's like special deal or something going on. What languages are available? Let me get that list up. One second. All right, here's what I currently see on their website. And we do know they're working on more languages, and that's something that we've talked to them a lot about. They are working on multiple more languages. I don't know which ones exactly, but that is something that's high on their priorities to do, from what I understand. Single user cost, I think that's what Vincent had asked. Was it what Vincent asked? Hold on. Yeah, he did. Christy can contact you on that, I think. Yeah, Christy says there's cost for individual licenses, but if it's larger groups, that price can change. So email and she can get what you need. marketing@studica.com. Yeah, so email Christy. Also, while I'm here, I'll leave this up so you have some more information. You can also, if you do have really specific pricing questions, you can contact our sales rep, sales@studica.com. They'll definitely know more than I do about pricing and what kind of flexibility they have for you. So I'd also recommend that if you do have pricing specific questions. You can also call our number, 888-561-7521. We're open Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Also, I've recorded this webinar, so we will be sending a recording out to all of you afterwards. Suzanne asked, are the various lessons tailored towards a variety of age groups or one size fits all? That's an interesting question. It seems, from my experience, it looks like it's one size fits all. I don't know if they have... Let me Google it real quick. If they have like a recommended like age requirement. No, I don't know. I don't really see anything there. But it seems like all the lessons are pretty similar. And so it would, as far as I can tell, it would require basic reading and hearing comprehension and things like that. Vincent says, is your program aligned with any particular textbook? No, not that I'm aware of. Are lessons designed by topic? Well, let me show you what I see here. I mean, topic in the sense of like beginners courses and things like that. I mean, it is split down into kind of specific things, like you could do grammar, but if I look in beginners, the topic is so much as what the lesson talks about, right? Pronouncing I and I in Spanish, for instance, where are you from? Spanish pronunciation of H and CH, how are you? So as far as topic, that's about what I can tell. I don't know if you mean house, home, etc. I mean, I don't know if it goes that specifically. You'd probably have to kind of look through each course and find one that might be ideal for what you're looking for. I think a lot of those things are wrapped up into different lessons. I don't know, like we have like a family lesson here. So yeah, I mean, they are topic. It's just they're kind of put into different lesson groups. Like here's a vacation topic, so stuff like postcards or weather reports, things like that. The instructions for the free trial, Vincent, are here in the red on this slide. Well, sorry, it's not a free trial, it's a free personal copy, 6 months of the full program. So just send an email to Christy, it's marketing@studica.com, and just be sure to put BAB free in the subject line, and just put in your school name and the state name for your school, and Christy can get back to you with that information. Anybody else have any other questions? Going once, going twice. All right, well, I want to thank you all for joining then, and if you do have any questions you think of later, feel free to contact us, sales@studica.com, or you can contact me, markp@studica.com, and ask those questions. We'll do our best to follow up with you and answer them. So thank you, and I hope you all have a good day. Goodbye.